What if I told you that for centuries, a secret list was kept? Not just any list, but a catalog of forbidden knowledge. A library of the world's most dangerous books. Books so powerful, so revolutionary, that they were believed to threaten the very foundations of civilization. Well, this is the story of that list. And I promise you, the truth behind this forbidden library is far more shocking and stranger than any of the fiction we've all been led to believe.
You know the story, right? We've all heard it. It's a tale as old as time, practically etched into our culture, the epic, unending war between science and religion. On one side, you have the heroic, clear-eyed scientists, pushing humanity forward. And on the other, a dogmatic, superstitious church, trying to drag us back into the dark. It's a story of progress versus suppression, reason against blind faith. And it seems to explain so much about our history. But what if that story, that simple, clean narrative, isn't the whole story? What if it isn't even close? Okay, here's where it all starts to get really interesting. For 400 years, there was an official blacklist of books you were forbidden to read. Now, you'd assume the #1 enemy of faith, Charles Darwin, would be at the top of that list, right? I mean, On the Origin of Species. It completely changed our understanding of life. But he was never on it. His books were never officially banned. But you know who was? Victor Hugo, the author of Les Miserables, a story all about justice, morality, and grace. That contradiction right there, that single startling fact, is the thread that when you pull it, unravels everything we thought we knew about this so-called war. So to really understand what's going on with that bizarre contradiction, we first have to understand the legend itself. The story of this great war has been told and retold so many times, in books, in movies, and classrooms, that it's just become fact. But as we're about to discover, some of the most powerful stories aren't the ones that are true, but the ones that have been carefully and intentionally constructed. This idea actually has a name. Historians call it the conflict thesis, and it's incredibly seductive because it's so simple. It paints history like a Hollywood blockbuster. You've got your good guys, the forces of light and reason, which is science, and you've got your bad guys, the forces of darkness and dogma, which is religion. They're locked in this eternal battle for our very souls. It's a fantastic story. The only problem? It's a deeply misleading. And right at the heart of this dramatic conflict, the story goes that the church had an ultimate weapon, a definitive, terrifying blacklist of ideas. It was called the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Prohibited Books. For generations, this list has been held up as Exhibit A, the final, irrefutable proof of religion's deep-seated hostility towards free thought, new ideas, and scientific discovery. So let's do what they didn't want you to do. Let's step inside this forbidden library. Let's really look at the index. What was it, really? Why was it created in the first place? And what kind of intellectual firepower did it actually contain? The answers tell a fascinating story, not just about religion, but about power, groundbreaking new technology, and the deep, deep fear of an uncontrollable idea. You see, the index wasn't some relic of the Dark Ages. It was actually a product of a very modern world, forged in the fire of a massive information revolution. Think about it. First, around 1440, Gutenberg's printing press comes along. It's basically the internet of its day. It turned books from these rare, handwritten objects into mass-produced items. Suddenly, ideas could spread like wildfire. Then, in the early 1500s, the Protestant Reformation used this brand new technology to challenge the church's authority on a scale nobody had ever seen before. The Index, created in 1559, was a direct response to that. It was an attempt, really, to put the genie back in the bottle, to control an information explosion that was threatening to turn their entire world upside down.
And let's be clear, this list was a powerhouse. I mean, it reads like a who's who of Western civilization. You've got the scientists who literally redrew the map of the universe, like Copernicus and Galileo. You've got the foundational philosophers of the Enlightenment, Descartes, Voltaire, Rousseau, Kant, the very thinkers who shaped our modern ideas of freedom and reason. And then you have literary giants like Victor Hugo and even modern existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre. Honestly, to be put on the index was, in a strange way, a sign that you had made it. It was a mark of your profound influence on the world.
So you've got all these monumental thinkers, scientists, philosophers, novelists. The list seems to confirm the whole story, right? A church at war with any and all modern thought. But here's the thing. The most revealing part of the index, the clue that blows the whole case wide open, isn't who was on it. It's who wasn't.
And we're back to this central, massive problem for the simple warfare story. Charles Darwin. The man whose theory of evolution is still seen as the single greatest challenge to religious doctrine.
was never placed on the index. His books were debated, they were attacked, they were condemned from pulpits all over the world, sure, but they were never officially forbidden by the Vatican's highest authority on censorship. How is that even possible if there was this all-out war on science? It just doesn't add up.
The answer, it turns out, is that the war itself is a pretty modern invention. The way we talk about it today, this framing of science versus religion, just isn't how people thought about it for most of history. It was a story that was crafted much later, with a very specific purpose in mind, long after Galileo and Copernicus were gone.
You have to realize that before the 1800s, the word science and religion, as we think of them, didn't really exist in the same way. What we call science was called natural philosophy, and it was an endeavor that was often pursued by priests and monks, people who saw understanding the natural world as a way of understanding God's creation. The idea that these were two totally separate warring camps is a narrative that was basically projected backwards onto the past.
In fact, we can trace this idea back to two specific, very influential men, John William Draper and Andrew Dickson White. In the late 19th century, they wrote these blockbuster, best-selling books with titles that left no doubt about their perspective. They basically framed all of Western history as this epic struggle. And in doing so, they weren't just reporting on history, they were actively shaping it. They popularized myths like the idea that everyone in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat, a story that historians now know is completely false. No educated person at the time believed that. So this really gives us two competing ways of looking at history. On one side, you have the 19th century conflict thesis. It's simple, it's dramatic, it's got clear heroes and villains. But on the other side, you have what modern historians call the complexity model. And this view shows that the relationship was, well, complex. It was never just one thing. For centuries, the church was actually the leading patron of science. Clergymen were often the leading scientists. And when major conflicts did happen, like the famous Galileo affair, they were often driven as much by politics, bruised egos, and personality clashes as they were by some fundamental battle between science and religion.
So where do the actual experts land today? Among professional historians of science, the people who dedicate their lives to studying this, the consensus is pretty clear. The simple story of a perpetual war, that conflict thesis, has been thoroughly and completely debunked. The evidence just doesn't back it up. In the words of one prominent historian, the whole idea is, and I'm quoting here, utter bunk. The real story is far more tangled, messy, and frankly, a lot more human and interesting.
Okay, so this brings us back to the index itself. We've established it wasn't exactly the anti-science boogeyman it was made out to be, but its story has one last chapter. One final, absolutely shocking twist that brings this whole thing crashing right into our modern world. And this might be the most surprising part of all.
For 400 years, this list persisted. It was a symbol of an older world, a relic from the Counter-Reformation, a monument to a time when a single institution believed it had the authority to declare a thought, an idea, completely off limits. It feels like something from a distant, almost alien past, doesn't it?
But it wasn't. The Index of Prohibited Books wasn't abolished in the 1700s during the Age of Enlightenment. It wasn't abolished in the 1800s with the rise of modern science. It was officially and formally terminated in the year 1966. Just think about that for a second. 1966. The Beatles had just released Revolver. Star Trek was on television for the first time. The entire world was caught up in the space race, getting ready to land a man on the moon. And this 400-year-old list of forbidden books, a relic from the 16th century, was still officially on the books. How? Why? What on earth happened in the middle of the swinging 60s to finally bring this incredibly long chapter of history to a close? Well, the end came for a mix of reasons, both deeply philosophical and incredibly practical. From 1962 to 1965, the Second Vatican Council was held, which was this huge meeting that fundamentally reshaped the Church's relationship with the modern world. A key document came out of it called the Declaration on Religious Freedom, which argued that faith has to be a choice, free from coercion. And you can see how a list of banned books starts to look pretty out of place with that idea. But there was also a very down-to-earth practical problem. As one cardinal at the time basically admitted, there were simply too many books being published. The censors couldn't possibly keep up with the flood. And so, after 407 years, the index was quietly retired. So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? Why does digging into the true story of a dusty old book list and debunking this simple war narrative actually matter to us today?
Well, it matters because it reveals something profound about how we understand the world and how easily our perceptions can be shaped by powerful stories.
The conflict thesis was a simple, powerful story, and it served a real purpose for the people who wrote it in the 19th century. But in its simplicity, it flattened a rich, complicated, and fascinating history into a two-dimensional cartoon. It taught generations of us to see conflict where there was often cooperation, to see enemies where there were often allies, and to miss the real, nuanced story of how humanity's quest for both spiritual and physical knowledge has unfolded. It's a powerful reminder to always question the easy narratives.
As the historian of science, Gary Ferngren, puts it, those big, dramatic conflicts that we all remember from history class, Galileo, the Scopes monkey trial, they stick in our minds because they're dramatic, but they were actually the exceptions, not the rule. For most of history, the relationship was far more collaborative. For example, the university system itself grew out of the church. Recognizing this doesn't mean we erase the real moments of conflict. It just means we place them in a much richer and much more accurate context.
And this brings us to a final, and maybe the most crucial thought. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum is gone. It's a historical artifact. But the human impulse to control information, to create forbidden lists of dangerous ideas, is that really gone? Or has it just changed its form? Today, these lists aren't handed down by a central authority in Rome. They're built quietly by algorithms that decide what you see and what you don't. They're enforced by social media mobs. They're shaped by political polarization, and they're reinforced by our own filter bubbles. The question for us then is this: who are the architects of today's forbidden lists? And when future historians look back on our time, what simple, powerful myths will they have to debunk about us?